First of all, thank you very much, Barbara, for the introductions. Thank you to the ACOR for the invitation to come and speak about our research in Jerash. And thank you to the Department of Antiquities, both in Jerash and in Amman, for making our work possible, which has been ongoing for the last 5 years. And what we're going to do today, in the time we were allotted, is not to take you through everything we've done in the last 5 years in Jerash, but simply show you some of the highlights dispersed chronologically from the Roman period down into medieval times, because where we are working in Jerash, we have all these periods represented. And maybe I should find the, yes, that's here. So we are working in what we have termed the northwest quarter, which is the highest area within the walled city, so the area behind the Artemision, which is a fairly steep hill. And we are all used to looking at this plan of Jerash, which looks very flat, but actually Schumacher in 1902 in the ZDP-V actually published a topographical plan of Jerash, on which you really see the very extreme topography of the site. So from the Wadi all the way up to where we work, there is more than 70 meters of difference in the level, and this is truly the highest point within the walled city. So it slopes very deeply down to the Wadi, and it's simply also just to give you an impression of the sort of topography that all the missions that have been working in Jerash since the early 20th century has had to deal with. And there we should again mention that Kreling's work, or the publication edited by Kreling from 1938, still remains a standard work which we go back to again and again when we go around and look at other places in Jerash. Like the Wadi, for example, he has described things that are now gone due to various developments, but it really still remains one of the very good overviews of how the city once looked in antiquity. Of course, as you also know, in Jerash, we basically work has focused on the western side of the Wadi, because on the eastern side of the Wadi, the modern city has been built up and is also still expanding. And of course, what you don't see on this map is also that a lot of construction work has gone on around the ancient city. So that also presents a challenge for the people doing survey projects, for example, in the area. Here you see a map of the northwest quarter, and that is based on the survey, the geodetic and also geophysical survey that we did in 2011, and going from nothing basically on the map of Jerash to a very dense structured area laid out on terraces that basically are being kept up by terrace walls and streets transversing the area and also connecting the various terraces. We now have to do with a very densely settled area, but as you might also get a sense of from the satellite picture, is also that really on the ground it looks as if there's just a lot of rubble lying around, but that is not what it is, and that's what we are going to show you a bit about. Well, most research in Jerash over the decades has really focused on the large, mainly Roman period monuments situated around the main street of Jerash. And there has, of course, been enough to do for the scholars working there, recording and publishing these monuments. But we were really interested in learning more about life outside of the main street and how integrated that would be, because it is fairly close to the city center as such, and situated right behind the large Roman period Artemision as well. And we wanted to figure out whether there was earlier settlement, among other things, on this hill as well, and look into water management installations and settlement development over time. Yes, I think you might be able to read around the corner here. Just briefly going to mention the different phases that we actually have been working with up there. I mean, we have stray finds from the Neolithic period and Bronze Age, but really only stray finds. We have very nice stray finds from the Hellenistic period, black glazed pottery, but not anything that we can say is textualized in any way. And the Hellenistic finds that we had were even in inverted stratigraphies that had eroded down from the hill. Then we have early imperial period and first to second century CE installations, mostly in the form of stone quarries. I mean, it turns out that basically any trench we have opened, at the bottom of those there are stone quarry marks, so it seems that this was an urban stone quarry at some point in time. We have a lot of water management installations and also a lot of non-contextualized finds or non-stratified finds. Then there's an intensification in settlement in the 2nd and 3rd century CE, which can't really surprise anyone, as we know that that was also when the city really was blooming. But what is perhaps one of the nice surprises is the very dense settlement and production complexes, and even now also religious buildings of the late imperial and late antique period. And this simply continues well into the early Islamic period until the earthquake of 749, which, at least in the area within we are working, completely devastated the northwest quarter, and we really have a very abrupt end to the flourishing of this area. And it's only in the later Ayyubid Mamluk period where settlement again was concentrated on top of the hill, and we'll also talk about that because we have some of the most significantly published Mamluk findings in Jerash. And of course, what we also realize is that during the Cherkessian resettlement of Jerash, there was also agricultural activity going on in the northwest quarter, and that can also be seen on earlier aerial photos.
As Rubina showed you on the last slide, we are mostly interested in the settlement history of the northwest quarter. And what we are doing there, the first thing we did was in 2011 an intensive survey recording all the walls and all the structures visible on surface. We also did then the geodetic survey, which resulted into the plan Rubina just showed. And what we also did in 2011 was a geophysical survey over the whole area of the northwest quarter. After 2011, then we started to excavate, and in the first year we excavated 3 trenches, and in the following years we excavated 5 or 6 trenches each year. And the way we positioned the trenches was not that we excavated whole buildings and worked in large areas, but we choose places where we thought that they are crucial for understanding the settlement history. And as Rubina said, we will show you some of the results from these trenches. Here you can see the way we worked in the first season, and you can see that we made geomagnetics survey, which you see here, and we also tried georadar in some areas, but as you know, you need very plain spaces for georadar, and Rubina showed you that the area is very much collapsed and many stones are lying around. So georadar didn't work that well, but we had good results in the geomagnetics plan. Here you can see down at the left, you can see the geomagnetics, the results, the magnetogram, and what you can see that some areas complement what can be seen on the surface, on the geodetic plan. So in some areas, especially here, we had more information in the geomagnetics than what was visible on surface. But to be honest, the geomagnetics gave us some information, but since there is so much limestone collapse and there is so much different building phases, and so much limestone in the soil, we were not that satisfied with the results. It's not that we had very nice ground plans of the buildings and structures, but we only had some information. But it was worth to try it because, as you know, it's necessary to try all non-invasive measures before you start excavating at such a site. And it helped, of course, for picking some areas where we did the first excavation. One of the, go back, just what you can see immediately from the plan up there on the left top is that the hill is structured along terraces, which you can see here. They did not exactly fit to the orthogonal street plan of the Cardo and Decumanus system in the center of the city, but they fit to the natural topography, and which you can see here in this plan, and the streets and the terraces go into this natural system. What we also immediately saw after the survey, that there are several streets. For example, this what we call the South Street, and here you can see the so-called Central Street, and between the streets there are passages where you can commute between the streets. So it became immediately after only doing the surface survey and the geomagnetics, it became clear how the layout of the city was done, but of course we had no idea at the beginning about the about chronological sequences. One of the this was the first understanding of the urban layout of the Northwest Quarter, but of course we were also interested to understand how the Northwest Quarter related to the city center. And we had the plan of Jerash in one of the slides before. You know that this is the Cardo, which transects the city of Jerash from north to south. And then in the north and in the south, there are two Decumani, one in the northern Decumanus, and in the south, the southern Decumanus. And what is also, what you also know, that the whole city was surrounded by city walls. And we asked ourselves, how did the Decumani, and especially the North Decumanus, relate to the Northwest Quarter? Is there a special connection between the North Decumanus and the Northwest Quarter? But as can be seen from the plans, so let's say here for a second, you can see here the Cardo, and here you can see the North Decumanus. But what is on the ground visible is that the North Decumanus ends near the North Theatre, and it doesn't continue further to the west. At least it's not excavated. But in many maps of Jerash, you see a projection from of this North Decumanus up to a gate here in the northwest, the so-called Northwest Gate, where also inscriptions attest that there must have been a gate. And so we wanted to know what about where this North Decumanus runs along, and we made a projection of the curse of the North Decumanus and started to excavate in two areas here to find the North Decumanus and to see how was the North Decumanus built in this area, and is there any adjacent architecture that might communicate with our Northwest Quarter. But what we found in these excavated trenches, you can see up here, and that is nothing. We found nothing on the projection of the North Decumanus, and that's why we also made a second trench to really test whether the projection was correct or whether there might be a slight deviation. But also the other trench was empty. So we found only some some terracing walls which are quite recent, and then we found layers down to bedrock or to virgin soil only with evidence for gardening and erosion. So what is clear is that the North Decumanus did not run until the gate, but it stopped somewhere west of the North Field. And what is very interesting, and what is of course known also from other cities in the Greco-Roman Mediterranean, that the walled area of the city was not everywhere densely built up, but urban gardening and other open spaces where must have been here in this area. And this shows that we cannot simply, when we make a reconstructed model of how this city looked like, we cannot simply fill in all the space with houses and buildings, but we have to be aware that, as in other places, also in Jerash, there were open spaces. Okay, so here you can see it, that somewhere here, where the last traces of the North Decumanus are visible, it must have stopped somewhere between here and our excavated trench.
Yes, and perhaps one can just say one more thing to the urban gardening, which we are doing a project on also, that it is quite rare, as you know, in these climates to actually find organic material. But we have been really lucky in these trenches to have found a fair amount of organic preserved material, which we are, for the time being, having analyzed by archaeobotanists also. And we've also worked with geochemists who, among other things, are doing some OSL dating for us on some of these things. And they are very clear Roman layers also. So we're not only talking about medieval farming, but it's clear that these gardens or smaller farming areas really go back to the Roman period as well, and extends up into up through time, and we think that's a very interesting and often overlooked feature in the way that urban archaeology has been done, or the possibilities, but now there are actually new methods and possibilities of picking up on these things. But another thing that has been popping up through the trenches that we have excavated is also very dense evidence for water management throughout all periods. We've made a little phase plan here. I mean, the red ones are the ones that represent multi-phase installations, so starting in the Roman period, and some of them being maintained up until the medieval period. We have here Umayyad water installations in the form of cisterns and water channels, and also, as said, we have evidence from the Mamluk period. It's quite interesting that we can actually now say with fair certainty that the water pressure pipes that we've found that runs east-west in this direction and north-south across the hill were already laid out in the Roman period, and most likely in the 2nd century CE, which is much earlier than we actually thought we would be able to find evidence. So really very well embedded in mortar water pipes. And here I show you one of the examples from Trench E, so embedded in thick mortar on both sides and the water pipe inside, and here from Trench H that runs along the edge of the hill, so to say, also here imprints from water pressure pipes and later water channels again. So basically we can also say something about the extent to which water was managed in more or less the same way over a long period of time, from the Roman period sometimes into the early Islamic period, and then again picked up on in the medieval period. Within the area we are working on, there is what until now is the largest open cistern in Jerash, a cistern structure of more than 40 meters in length and almost 20 meters wide. And as you see here also, as all other things in this area, basically, it's full of collapse, a lot of rubble stones lying around. So it's very difficult to actually get at the faces for a structure like this. we put out a test trench across the cistern, and through that and the very intense survey we did, we could actually come up with very clear relative chronology of 7 phases of this cistern. So going from repair, or the first phases, repair phases of the hydraulic mortar, a collapse phase, and a reuse of some of the cistern for habitation, and then finally a filling in of the cistern. But this was only a relative chronology that didn't really allow us to date the structure at all. And that was why we decided to employ a recently refined method of radiocarbon dating, which can be done on hydraulic mortar, and which at Åbo Academy in Finland, they have done a fair amount of projects on. So what we did was to make batches of sampling from these 7 phases, we could say had a relative relation to each other. And as you can also see here, we did a batch that contained a certain amount of samples, because as it goes with hydraulic mortar, there will be some of these samples that are highly contaminated and will give very wrong dating. So you need a certain amount of samples from each batch in order to basically be able to exclude the contaminated ones. And here again, you get a very good impression of how messy it actually looked in this cistern. So we have a lot of hydraulic mortar in layers on the walls and on the bottom of the cistern, but then we have at some point a collapse of the man-made cistern over a natural cave that was then later used as a cistern, and there was even put in a wellhead to get to the water in this natural cave, and on top of that, buildings were put into the cistern, so for a while it was actually used for habitation. And what came out of these dating was, to our great surprise and also joy, we have to say, was that the first phase basically can firmly be said to stem from the 2nd century CE. And it's a large water installation. And then there are various phases of repairs and later repairs, and then a collapse of the cistern, as I just said, and then end of habitation and a very dense filling in of the whole cistern. And the reasons for that we are working on, we've been working on in the last campaign and are doing the analysis on that. And it's quite difficult to explain why you choose to massively fill in a cistern like this. Well, obviously it's because it wasn't used for water anymore, but why habitation didn't go on there, for example. And until now, I wouldn't say that we have one good answer to that question. But what we can say is that we have extensive evidence for management of water to a large degree at a much earlier point in time than thought until now, and this of course also was something that was maintained over time, even into well, after the earthquake, not, but then again in the medieval period. Yes, I think.
You can see from what Rubina just presented, we were very much looking at understanding the early phases of the northwest quarter, and we have, as Rubina said, quarry traces as one of the earliest phases. Then we have this water installations of the 2nd century, the large cistern. But we did not find much other evidence, in situ evidence, of architecture or settlement in the northwest quarter, which can be dated to the early Roman or the High Empire period. We didn't find much. We had some of these water channels, but we were really looking for what was going on in the northwest quarter at the time when there was this enormous boom in the city center with all these public buildings. And while looking for some evidence for the early period, our first trench, which we excavated in 2012, was trench A, which was really on the very top of the hill And we choose this area not only because it was the very top of the hill, but also because we had a strange anomaly in the geomagnetics. And so we said we want to excavate this area. It looked as if there was a large corner of a building. What we then excavated there was, after half a meter, we came to bedrock. It was all bedrock, and we found this corner of a deep room, which was rock cut, and later it turned out that obviously the compressed soil on top of this corner made the anomaly in the geomagnetics. It was only a corner of a room which was several meters deep, and it was clear when we excavated this room that it had been filled in intentionally and rapidly. So at one point in time, this room was completely covered and closed. And what we thought from the pottery and material that we were encountering is that it must be a late Roman period that this room was closed. You can see here the fill layers, and here's a dense fill layer with a lot of stones, but also fill layers with more earth and loose material. What we then found was something that at first sight looked like, if we would be in Central Europe, it would be cremation burials. We found several of these cooking pots placed carefully. Here you can see that a circle of stones was placed around this cooking pot. Here you can see a cooking pot that was attached to the wall, and it was carefully attached or placed next to a large block. And we found in total 3 of these cooking pots in the fill layer. So these cooking pots were not associated to any walking level or installations, but they were all put into the fill layer, and they were put in during the rapid filling of this room. And it is clear that these cooking pots were placed there intentionally. What was in this cooking pot was an ashy material, and also some pottery sherds, bone material, plaster, glass, and pottery sherds. And that was all mixed up in these 3 cooking pots, and 2 of the cooking pots even had a tile on top. So it became clear that this is an intentional cooking pot deposit, and we were wondering what it means. And we came up in a publication which we just published in Syria last year, that they might be termination deposits, that when the room was filled in, some kind of rituals were undertaken to fill in and to seal this room. And what was surprising for us, that we had some charcoal dated from these cooking pots, and it turned out that it's the second half of the 3rd century. So it is clear that in the second half of the 3rd century, an older room was closed. We don't know at the moment what was the function of this older room, but it was closed, and this kind of cooking pot deposits were brought in. And after we had found these cooking pots in 2012, we also found in 2015, close to the city walls, where also there were fill layers, we also found another of such cooking pot deposits, and also from other places we found in the literature cooking pot deposits from the late Roman period. And this is something where we had the impression that people were not yet aware of that this is something that is related to an intentional procedure or intentional practice. Another evidence for Roman material in the northwest quarter comes from our second excavated trench, which is trench B. It's also from 2012, and there we found an enormous block that is shaped like an altar. When we started excavation, we thought there's an altar, and we excavated the altar because part of this top side of the altar was sticking out of the earth because there had been some illicit digging before, and we decided to excavate there then properly. But it turned out that the proportions of this block are much too high. This is like 3 meters, much too high and much too narrow, and to be an altar that was functional. And here you can see these altars, which we know from Jerash in a large amount. They have these horns and this fire basin, and here you can see we have also these horns and the fire basin. After we excavated this building block, it turned out that the building, that this architectural block belonged to a press pier of an oil press. It was here, standing here in Poland, and this is the opposite press pier, and here you can see the press bed. Here you see the counterweights, and it was part of an oil press, and it was in secondary use. In the collapse of the trench, we also found the upper part of this block, and you can see that the reconstruction of the upper part and the lower part results into a large architectural element and not an altar, an architectural element with this niche on this side and a niche on the small on the other side. And we were wondering what was the purpose of this architectural element, and interestingly, this element is from in Jerash. We usually have 2 types of limestone which is used in the buildings. We have this more fine, hard, more reddish one, which is used for the public buildings in the city center, and we have a more coarse limestone which is used in many places outside the city center and in places which were built before the large construction program of Trajan and Hadrian. And this is one of the blocks which definitely does not belong to the building program of Trajan and Hadrian period in the city center. We then realized that one side, this side, was roughly pressed and it had an inner process, so it was part of a building, of a facade, and this side was worked, so it is clear that it was visible, and we assume that it belonged to a kind of gate, with this side being visible, and there's also this niche, so when you enter, you have a niche at the side and you have niches at the front, and we assume that there must have been a second piece for the other side, and that it belongs to a gate. We then looked at examples where we have these elements, which we have here at this building block. Elements meaning altar iconography. Altar iconography reduced to an architectural motive. So it's not an altar for doing sacrifices, but it's an altar-like iconography, which is like an iconographic element, a decorative element, and of course these niches. niches we of course have everywhere in Greco-Roman architecture, but we have it very often on entrances to sanctuaries in Jerash and elsewhere. Here we have brought you an example from the Lebanon or from northern Syria. And there also we have some examples where altars, which you can see here, or here in Cistern, also an altar, where altars flank the entrance to a sanctuary. So this altar iconography seems to be exclusive to entrances to sanctuaries, and therefore we assume that this block belonged to a sanctuary in Jerash, but of course we cannot claim that the sanctuary was in the northwest quarter, since it was in secondary use and it could have been brought from anywhere. But one has to keep in mind that it's really an enormous block, 3 meters high, and you not, if you have other choices, you don't carry it from far away up to the highest point of the city. So this seems to be circumstantial evidence for a Roman period, and the architectural decoration clearly points to a Roman date. This seems to be circumstantial evidence for a Roman period sanctuary, maybe in the northwest quarter, but not necessarily.
Yes, and I think that sort of concludes all the circumstantial evidence that we have for earlier Roman phase on top of the hill. So everything really with the termination deposits, with the water management installations, and with the block that Achim just presented also speaks for a Roman period, an earlier Roman period phase on the hill to some extent, which we only can get on through circumstantial evidence, or evidence that that might be dated through through scientific or natural science methods also. And in 2015, we actually laid out what we call Trench N in order to understand a cave complex that we had been excavating also, and which we will not talk about today, but which was also seems to have been a Roman period production area, like an oil press underground installation also, I mean, on the hill up here, and where there's a staircase going down into the caves, and then there was actually another cave. And what we wanted to find in 2015 was actually the entrance to the southern cave from the south side of this terrace. What we found instead, and which is not uninteresting, was parts of a large mosaic flooring. And we were in many ways quite lucky, because there were also large Greek inscriptions on this mosaic floor. So that's not every day that you are this lucky. This is the area of the so-called synagogue church also, so a complex turned into a church, we know by an inscription around 530, and these mosaics here in Trench N date to a little bit later, because they are even dated by month and year. So the first one is from March 576 CE, and the second one from 591 CE. And this is, well, as you see, we did not excavate the extent of the complex. We hope to work on it this summer again, really to understand what is going on here. But we do understand the inscriptions and some of the new knowledge that brings to us, and I give them to you here in a German translation, because we are currently publishing them in a German journal. But we can briefly go through them. So these are inscriptions that mention the Bishop Marianus, which is also known from the Marianus chapel close to the Hippodrome, and also mentions the diacon Stephanos, who belonged to the Numerus Electi Justiniani. So this is an until now unknown military, late Roman military unit that was stationed in Jerash in the late antique period. Very interestingly enough, there are also words which have been not known until now in late Roman Greek, namely the archaeologopod, so the silver taker of this military unit also. And what the inscription says is that under the bishop and Stephanos, the numerus electi, they paid for the mosaic in this part of the building, and even gives us the month March 576. So, well, of course, dated by the indictions of the Byzantine period. And the second inscription goes on, tells us about the same Stephanos, which these years later still was the diacon, but they now have a new tax conductor, but the Electi Justiniani were still there and had paid part of the mosaics in another part of the building. And just to go back again to give you a better impression, then we have the earlier mosaic here to the right, when you enter the building from here, and the later mosaic to the left. And as you also see, these mosaics are nicely but quite basically decorated. Until now, we don't have any other decoration but these sort of square decorations with a rosette in the middle that go on around the tondo here. And the same goes in a little bit of a different style around the tabula insata in the western part of the building. But this is, of course, a very interesting complex, and might perhaps also explain some of the things that show up in the geophysical survey, because this is, without doubt, a complex that's actually dedicated by a unit in the late Roman army, about which we until now didn't know anything. In the late Roman army in the east, we do not know a lot about either. So this is going to bring really new knowledge about the transfer of military units to cities, well, in this case, Jerash also, and might be or is very likely an ecclesiastic complex connected to a special unit that obviously also had the monetary means to put up and upkeep this building, at least for a period of time. What we cannot say until now is how far this building extended. We have found the western end of the building, but we've not excavated the floor completely. I mean, as you know, it will also take some conservation for the mosaics and preserving them in the right way. So that is also part of our considerations in the way that we are going to explore this complex further. But one very interesting feature is also the early Islamic reuse of the mosaic floors, which is something we are working on as well, because in the early Islamic period, before the earthquake, this complex was actually divided into further rooms, but the mosaic floors were completely used and even repaired in some places during this phase. And you see one of the early Islamic walls which had been put down very nicely and carefully on one of the mosaic inscriptions. Usually we don't move any walls in our excavation. We stop excavations when we find a wall, but in this case we did take out these stones in order to be able to read the inscription here. But there are other, I mean, you see the wall here, well, this was after removal, but you see the other part of the early Islamic wall, which basically divided this part of the room. The room was actually in the Byzantine period roofed. We have found bases for columns or pillars also, so it's a quite large roofed building, which was then reused in some way until the earthquake. And we know this because we actually both found organic material, a large piece of wood, which was not carbonized, that had fallen down when the earthquake happened, and we also had early Islamic ceramics that had fallen on the mosaic floor when the building collapsed. So that is dated quite well.
So Rubina has just taken you to the Byzantine period, and I will now show you some evidence from the Umayyad period we found on the so-called Eastern Terrace. Of course, we find Umayyad material everywhere, but here on the Eastern Terrace, which is the area overlooking the Artemision, we found two houses or domestic complexes which are purely Umayyad without Byzantine precursors. So we have to assume that this area was unsettled before or until the Umayyad period, and only in the Umayyad period in this area housing constructions took place. And the good thing is not only that it only starts in the Umayyad period, but it's also clear that after the earthquake of 749, nothing else happened in this area, so there is no Mamluk rebuilding or other disturbances, but it's really a Pompeii situation. We have the 749 earthquake collapse, sealing the inventory of the houses of the day before or the day of the earthquake, and we have the full inventory of these buildings, which is really a very unique situation. I now want to show you the housing complex in K, and Rubina will show you later. What we have in K, you can see here, it's not the full house that we excavated, but we only excavated one room more or less, which is this room. Here you have a courtyard, an open courtyard, and here you have another room, which at a later phase was blocked. Here the door, and so it's more or less this room. And this room yielded very rich finds, of which you see some here. So you can see we found completely intact glass vessels. We found this scissor. We found this bread stands, oil lamps. We found jewelry. We even found a Byzantine weight, which is interesting because at that point in time the Byzantine weight system might have not been in use anymore. And we also found this enormous spoon. But also other metal finds. This is only a very small choice of the finds we have in this room, and which of course is not the inventory of the basement here, but it's the inventory of an upper floor, since the basement is very simple. It has only a clay floor, and it has, you can see here, a hearth cooking installation. But this material obviously came from a second floor and fell when the collapse happened. What we also found in this collapse was a small coin hoard of Byzantine and Arab-Byzantine coins, which you can see, and here this is a close-up of one of the coins, where you can even see the textile attached to the coin, and we can reconstruct that the 15 coins of the coin hoard were once put into a purse, probably a cloth purse, and this coin hoard was found here in this area close to the wall, and here you can also see the fine situation of some of the coins, and we could easily identify these coins belonging to the coin hoard, not only because they were found in close vicinity, but also because all of them had this textile impression on the coin. Here you can see some of the coins, and it's interesting to see that the coins, the earliest coin is from Anastasius, so late 5th, early 6th century, and the latest coin is this wonderful coin of Abdel Malik, which was minted either in Jerash or in Cistern, and this is one of the very large Arab Byzantine coins, and one of the latest coins before the coin reform of Abdel Malik, after which the coins did not or showed only very few images, but only text. And you can see these coins, these Arab Byzantine coins, they are from the earlier cases where the Arab Byzantine coins copy and develop further Byzantine imagery. The room in which we found the coins, the coin hoard, also included regular fine coins. And these regular fine coins, which were spread all over the room, partly were also post-reform coins. So this means coins of the first half of the 8th century. And these coins which are in the coin hoard are basically only of the latest ones are of the very, very early 8th century or the later 7th century. So it means that this coin hoard was probably an earlier collection of Byzantine and Arab Byzantine coins, which was hidden somewhere in the building and not in use anymore. These coins probably were not circulating in Jerash anymore when the earthquake happened, but it is a typical coin hoard which was forgotten somewhere. It was maybe placed, which happens quite often, maybe placed in a wall or close to a wall or in a wall niche, and it got forgotten, and only the earthquake brought the coins out of the wall again and until we found it. Another interesting object which we found in the collapse was this small tube, which you can see here, and it's a tube was it bronze or iron?
It was lead.
Lead, yeah. The tube was lead, and at first we didn't recognize what it is, but then you can see from the side that in this lead tube there was a thinly folded tablet. And this tablet was looked as if it is lead. At first we thought it's a lead tablet, and then we thought this is a typical curse tablet. But then after the removal, after a restorator in Potsdam in Germany had taken out the tablet, it turned out that this is a silver tablet, a very thinly folded silver tablet.
Well, one should perhaps mention that that's not possible to see, but we had to have metal analysis done on it, and it is really purely silver with some gold mixed in, but not enough for it to be electron. So it's a very precious material.
Yeah, and when we, after we had the silver tablet taken out of the container, we of course immediately saw that there are letters on the silver tablet. And of course we were eager to read it, but the silver tablet was so thinly folded and so thin that it was clear that you can't open it without completely destroying it, and we were discussing it with several restorators and looking for methods of how to make it readable. And then we came across a new method of reading such folded tablets, and that is computer tomography, and that we applied to this tablet. So we brought the tablet to a computer tomograph, and the computer tomography gave us the computer tomogram, and that of course was a lot of data which is in slices, and it doesn't help really to, you can't read it, but you need special software to digitally unfold the text or the tablet, and it was a very long process. We had a trained colleague, philologist for Semitic philology from Bochum University, John Müller-Larsen, who was trained into this method, and he, in a very time-consuming process, digitally unfolded the here is that the tablet had 17 lines, and after we had the lines, it was clearly visible how the letters looked like, but nobody could read it. It was clear that it is pseudo-Arabic. We showed it to many philologists, and they all looked at it and they thought about all kinds of Aramaic or Arabic or other Semitic languages and scripts, but nobody really could read it. And it's clear that it must be pseudo-Arabic. So the person who made this tablet, of course, when he made the tablet, he never assumed that someone will unfold it one day and try to read it. So it's kind of the magic of the script or the power of the script that is applied here, and it's only a pseudo script, which you can see here. And there are some magic letters. You can see that in the first line there are so-called characteres, which are Greek letters. But other letters, you can see here, they really clearly imitate Arabic script. And so it must be a pseudo script which was only made for magic purposes. Yeah, it was a bit, we were a bit disappointed not being able to read it, but on the other hand, it's very fascinating to see also these pseudo scripts and see how writing was perceived and used in such magical contexts.
Yes, and well, the next to last thing that we want to show you is the house situated next to K, namely in our trench P, which unsurprisingly also turned out to be a sealed Umayyad period house, consisting, well, the parts of it that we excavated, of a courtyard with very nice stairs leading down to the courtyard from the street, a rock-cut cistern, and a large room that at some point was divided into two rooms and a door here that was closed off. This is a wonderful example of a moment in time, because what we found in this house was very few objects actually, but we found wall paintings that were prepared for new wall paintings to be put on top of them, and not least did we find extensive evidence for the preparation of mosaics. In this, next to this wall, a throw had been built in with stone slabs, so standing up not quite against the wall, but there was 40 centimeters here of a gap, and this whole gap was filled with unused white tesserae produced locally of limestone. And that was what we currently were doing in the library today, writing up an article on this extremely unique find. And it really turns out that until now, although people have been writing about mosaic production, mosaic workshops, and the identification of workshops and the way mosaicists work, nobody has until now published a find like this, because it is very unique. I mean, if there are two possibilities, we could be talking about a mosaic workshop. We do not think so, because in all the debris fallen again from the first floor, we found large parts of older mosaics, floor mosaics that had fallen down. This is another thing. I mean, mosaics on the upper floor, I mean, on the first floor of a building is something that takes extremely strong buildings, but the upper floor was supported by stone arches, which we also found, so it would actually have been possible. On top of that, we found stones prepared for lining them with tesserae as well. So it actually does not seem to have been a workshop, but a house, a private house that was undergoing reconstruction. So as well as I said, we found several layers of wall painting here, but the youngest layer of wall painting was basically cut so that it was ready for new layers of wall paintings to be put on top. And we are currently doing the analysis of those finds, which are from 2015, but really show this richness of the Umayyad period also until the earthquake, and on the one hand show the complete cultural continuity and incorporation, like the scroll also of phenomena that will that were known from the Greco-Roman period, but also see then the implementation of a new and much more local culture also. And last but not least, we just want to show some of our Mamluk finds as well, because on the very top of the hill, it actually turns out that we have very, well, what we call the Mamluk hamlet, so a representational building reusing a lot of Roman period spolia in the Mamluk face. And then we have other less representative Mamluk buildings on the northern side, here on the northern terrace, and here in Ai we actually also had extensive evidence for Mamluk occupation. And here you basically see the outline of these buildings. And I mean, apart from what was published in the 80s by Tolbeck and what was the Italian scholar who yes, exactly, who also published on the Mamluk period. Not a lot has been published on the Mamluk period from Jerash, but of course we know that it must have been there, and this is now very nice evidence for that. Where we have also collected the sources talking about medieval Jerash, and now that will be published, I think, in May. We also have a project on the Mamluk ceramics going on with a doctorate student who's looking at possible local production of the handmade ware in Jerash also, and we hope to come to some interesting conclusions about that. So that is just, again, to sum up, I mean, from all this seemingly rubble lying on 4 hectares on the hill, extremely interesting evidence comes out talking about the continuity and change over a very long period of time. And it is really wonderful to be able, I mean, whereas we thought we might only find Byzantine period things on the hill, it is fantastic to now be able to work with this amazing span from the Roman down into the medieval period, where we've also had to challenge ourselves and bring other experts into the project who knew much more about, for example, the Mamluk period or the early Islamic period than us. And then again, I mean, we would like to thank you all for coming today to listening to this, and thank the foundation who sponsor our work, and last but not least, of course, thank our Jordanian colleagues who make it possible for us to work here every summer in July and August in Jerash, and we enjoy that very much. So thank you for your attention.